Hello, we're going to talk today about the moon that's coming up. It's a new moon in a few hours, and I'm going to talk about that briefly. But what I'm going to focus on is Mercury retrograde that's in Cancer, which is going to be happening in a couple of weeks from now on June 30th. But if we look at the moon, you can see here, if you can see my pointer, that you've got the sun and the moon conjunct, and that's on June the 15th, and it is the 14th if you're in the USA, and that's at 4 a.m., around 4 a.m. British summertime. So it will be about midnight if you're in New York, and then just before, and then earlier in the evening in California. So we got the sun conjunct the moon. It's going to be in Mercury at 24 degrees. And the moon will be sextile to Mars. So you can see Mars is here, and it's just moved on a little bit because Mars is at 20 degrees of Taurus. I'm just about to have my Mars return, which happens every couple of years for all of us, individually, depending on where Mars is in our chart, like a change of direction or a stepping up to our direction, one way or the other. Then we've got Mercury square Saturn. So Mercury, so that can be a bit of internal restriction, like feeling sort of restricted, but also figuring things out. So if you can see here, it's in a orb that's separating and it's 5 degrees. So it has moved on a bit, Mercury, but it will be going retrograde. We can see where that goes back to when we look at it, but I don't think it will be moving into Saturn, but we won't know until we look. Then we've got Venus is conjunct Jupiter. So if you look at Venus, if you're learning astrology, you can see here it's just moved over Jupiter a few days ago. It's now at 1 degree of Leo here. And in Leo, it's where, it also holds the fifth house, but it's about fun and creativity within relationship in Leo. And it's where we can take pride in each other and also value our appearance and such like. So that's a nice Venus in Leo. If you have that at your birth chart, I have Venus in Aries myself. Then we've got Venus is sextile to Uranus, which is quite a tight orb. So you can see here that you've got Uranus at 2 degrees in Gemini, and you have Venus here at 1 degree of Leo. So that is a sextile. And then Venus is also trine to Neptune up here, which is nice. That's going on for a few days because we got 4 degrees Neptune in Aries, and that will move into 4 degrees in the coming days, Venus. Then we've got Venus opposition to Pluto coming up here, which is also something that's worth checking where that's in your chart. So that can be a bit tricky. Venus opposition Pluto, not tricky, like, it's something to just watch out for. And then Uranus sextile to Neptune. So Uranus is sextile to Neptune up here. It's moving into an exact sextile at some point. And then Uranus is trine Pluto. And you can see that's moving into that placement as well because you've got 5 degrees and 2 degrees, 5 degrees Aquarius, Pluto down here, 2 degrees. So that's holding for some time. And then Neptune is sextile to Pluto. So this is a beautiful configuration. So Neptune sextile to Pluto and Neptune sextile to Uranus. And then that brings this trine going on here. The north node is trine to the sun at this time, and it's moved up. Let's see, it's applying, so it's going into a trine. So if we look at the sun and we look at the north node, we can see that it's 2 degrees. So when the sun reaches 2 degrees of, when it's not going to be exact, but it will be moving on in maybe at 1 degree in a week's time. Again, I'd have to have a look. So let's talk about the Mercury Retrograde in Cancer, which is June the 30th, 2023, and it will be at 17:35 p.m. British Summer Time. So just know that if you're in California, you go 8 hours back. If you're in New York, then it's 5 hours back. And then if you're, depending where you are, you want to be looking at that time if you're interested. And then it will station direct on July 23rd, 2026, Mercury in Cancer. And it's what's fascinating about this, this is such a long period of time. We got from June the 1st, Mercury went into the sign of Cancer, and it's going to be there until the 9th of August when Mercury will move into Leo. So that's a really long period of time, and that's why I want to check this out. And also my ruler of my sun sign is Mercury as well. So Mercury goes retrograde, stationing at 26 degrees and 15 minutes of Cancer. So if I go to the 30th of June up here, so you can see that. I may not have the exact time there, but there you go, 30th of June. You can see that Mercury is stationed, that little red S there shows that, and that's 26 degrees. And that will be a period of 23 to 24 days, and it will stay in the sign of Cancer all the way through until August 9th, giving us a really extended time of Mercury in Cancer transit for just over 10 weeks in total. And normally Mercury moves through a sign in 3 weeks, to give you an idea of how that works. So it's normally 3 weeks, but at this point it's going to be that in the sign of Cancer for a whole 10 weeks. So it's really very meaningful. And the retrograde is more than doubling the residency there. Cancer is not simply a sign Mercury is passing through this summer. It's a sign Mercury is being asked to inhabit and to settle into and learn from the inside. And before I go into detail of what this means, if any of what I share here resonates and you would like to bring it into contact with your own natal chart, I do work with people individually, and the booking link is in the description below the video. So this is the mind that feels, because the sign of Cancer is the feeling sign. It's a water sign. So to understand what Mercury retrograde in Cancer means, we first need to understand what Mercury in Cancer means at all. And because this is not Mercury's most natural habitat, and that tension is part of what makes it really interesting. So Mercury is the planet of the rational, articulating linear mind, and it wants to think clearly and to communicate precisely. That's what Mercury wants to do, to move quickly between ideas and connections, and it's most comfortable in the air signs. So that's worth knowing, like Gemini and Aquarius, and its own earthy sign of Virgo as well, where it can analyze and discriminate. And in Cancer, Mercury enters into water, and water does not think in straight lines. A water sign is a whole different thing. So in Cancer, the mind becomes tidal. If you think about tides, it's like going backwards and gently forwards and backwards. And it thinks in feelings, in images, in memories that surface without being summoned. And it absorbs the emotional atmosphere of a room before it registers any of the spoken content. And it communicates not primarily through argument or information, but through tone, through nuance, and also what is carried in that space between the words. It's like, things unsaid, but we can feel, it's very feeling, the sign of Cancer. And Mercury in Cancer is the mind that knows something is wrong before anyone has said anything. So it's picking up on the subtle signs. It is the communication style that wraps every sentence in feeling, that cannot separate what is thought from what is felt. And that speaks from the gut and the heart as much as from the head. So it's a whole different thing you can see just from what I'm explaining there. And this is not a weakness. It's important to understand that it's just a different form of intelligence, one that our Mercury in Gemini culture tends to undervalue because it cannot be easily quantified or accelerated. And the emotional intelligence that Cancer carries is ancient and sophisticated. It reads the room with extraordinary accuracy. and it knows how to create safety through the quality of its attention. And its communication communicates care as naturally as if it communicates information, because the sign of Cancer is also about caring. And it understands that sometimes the most important thing being said is not in the content of the words, but in whether the other person feels truly heard. So you can see where we're heading here. And that could, cause some difficulties for people, because a lot of us, are we being truly heard? And do we truly hear ourselves as well? Our inner world of, the watery Neptunian as well is feeling, but at a different level. Cancer, is the fourth house, traditionally home roots and the private world. And Cancer is also, it's very intimate part of the chart. If you look at the fourth house, is at the bottom of the chart. It's in where it's unseen. And it's the house of home, not home as a postcode or, our property, but as an interior experience, the atmosphere that we experience, the place where we can set down and what we carry in the outside world. You know that feeling if you are in a comfortable position in a home life where you get home and it feels like you can just put everything down and you can relax. And I'm sure we all experience that. Some of us may be in a situation where we're in a home right now where that we're not experiencing that. And I know that definitely growing up, I did not experience a safe space. So I didn't have that feeling of home being safe. But saying that, I do have Chiron conjunct Saturn in my fourth house, which speaks for itself when we begin to understand astrology and the terminology of astrology. And that's the beauty of it. We can begin to see what we are working with on this journey that we're on. So the home is the space, physical or psychological, where we're not performing. So that's the thing, if we've been brought up in a place where we've had to perform, or, we've never had proper rest. And Cancer is a place where we're able to rest, in our shell, if you think of the crab. So the fourth house is where our ideas and information are exchanged in private. If you think about that when we're in our home, the communication is private. People don't see us in a relaxed state the way we would be in at home. And it's, where we may have deep conversations around the kitchen table if we live with people. And also, things that happen when that front door closes, and the exchanges are between people who know each other well enough not to need a public face. That's the hope of where we have a home. But again, you may not have experienced that in childhood, because I certainly did not. And it can be difficult to, for many people to create that for themselves as well. It's not an easy path to create a space, but it is possible. We have to know what we want, whether we want to live alone or we want to live with other. And that's something we figure out as we move through life, if we have those choices as well. So Mercury moving through this territory now, it's going to move through it really slowly. If you look here, coming back to the chart, you've got Mercury at 27 degrees. So I'm going to go days, maybe if I go weeks ahead, because that will be easier. So Mercury is going to go 26 degrees, it's retrograde. So I'm going to go weeks and I'm going to show you. So we're at the 30th of June and it's already been there since the 1st of June. And we got 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then it goes back to 16 degrees here. But if I take it by days now, if you can see Mercury here, and we've got stations, and then it's direct, and that's around the July 25th, if you can see up here. So that's where it's going to be on July 25th when it goes direct. And then it will take from 16 degrees up to 0 degrees Leo. It's going to take up to August 9th, so that you're aware of that. So it's also the question of living arrangements with this placement within the fourth house territory. And, it's also the sign of the shell, which I've mentioned, the crab, the home that moves with creatures rather than being fixed to one spot. And during this Mercury retrograde, questions around home and living situations may need to be revisited. So that can happen. There may be something that's come up that things have changed, and as a result, we are having to make changes or having to use our voice on certain things. And conversations that were assumed to be settled may need to be reopened, and plans about where we live, how we live, who we live with. And these are the fourth house matters. And, if you could have, for instance, I've got Cancer in the eighth house, and you may have it somewhere else in your chart. So you want to look where that is for you, because that's the area that it's going to be colouring. Yeah. So Mercury retrograde in Cancer is asking that the thought through, we're going to think through something again, and with more feeling, more care, and more honesty than perhaps we did the first time. And Mercury retrograde, the good thing is it's the invitation to go back over something. And it has a reputation that is largely misunderstood. People get freaked out when, not everybody, but people say, Mercury's going retrograde. I can't sign this. I can't do that. It's like, be easy on yourself. We're moving through space at high speed on a planet. So we just need to chill out. And there are things that we have to do or purchase, or things that are happening in our lives that we can't run by the clock of an astrology, chart. So do know that. So it's not simply a period when things go wrong with technology, which people think, and communication through disruptions in those areas, although they can certainly occur. But, who knows whether that's synchronicity at some level. But at its deeper level, Mercury retrograde is a period when the forward moving function of the mind is asked to pause and turn inward. So what we're doing is we're turning inward. So it's rewind, release, and relax. And the belonging of this period, review, reconsider, return, remember, renegotiate, and restore. So it's all of those R words there. The retrograde is not a malfunction. It's a different mode of Mercury's intelligence, one that values depth over speed. So particularly with it in Cancer, it's more about depth, and which recognizes that some things cannot be thought through properly until they have been thought through again. It's like sometimes if I like listening to Audible books, and sometimes I'm listening, but I'm not really listening. So then I've got to go back and listen again. And I'm sure you've all experienced that, where maybe you've read a chapter in a book and you go back to it, sometime later, or a book itself, and you get completely different information from it that you didn't clock the first time. And that's what's going on here. And in Cancer, that inward turn takes the mind directly to emotional memory. So for a lot of us, it's going to be about emotional memory that's going to surface in this retrograde. And it's often older than the immediate situation, and older than we expect. And a conversation in the present can trigger feelings from years ago. I've had that a bit this week. I mean, I know it's not going retrograde until another 2 weeks, but I've definitely had yesterday a couple of situations, like this synchronicity thing going on, where it took me right back to childhood memories or some unpleasant memories. And then I had affected my dream state last night. But in the dream state, there was a form of protection from the predator type situation going on in this dream. So different messages coming through in dream time as well. So, it could be a domestic arrangement that seemed fine suddenly feels wrong in a way that was hard to articulate, or something from the family of origin rises up in, the throat and asks to be spoken because it's Mercury. So it could be that. And this Mercury in Cancer retrograde's gift, it creates the conditions for emotional material that has been stored in the body and the memory to finally find its way into language, which is brilliant, because a lot of us have got so many things that have been unsaid, or that we may choose not to speak, but we remember. And this can feel uncomfortable, and the mind that Cancer rules does not always want to speak what it knows, because the instinct is to protect and to retreat into our shells. If you think about it, when you many situations, I can flash back to different situations where, I either wish I'd said something or I wanted to say something and I was unable to. So you may have these memories coming up as well, but wanting to retreat, and you may not want the exposure, and it's going to be the case that some people won't. And this retrograde creates a gentle but persistent pressure towards articulation, towards the finding of words for things that have only lived on only as a feeling. So you know that you have a feeling and can't put a word to it. So the question this retrograde is asking is, what have you been carrying in your emotional memory that has never been properly spoken? I can come up with many, many things myself. If you ask yourself that, what has not been spoken? What do you know in your gut and your body that you have not yet found a way to say? And that could be in writing something, it could be in expressing something in art, or it could be in speaking. And it's communicating emotional truth. And in Cancer, it's the communication of emotional issues, not emotional outbursts, not reactive speaking from a flooded nervous system. So we want to be slower. If you think the crab moves slowly, yeah, and then it withdraws a bit and then it might go forward again, and be more considered over the process of finding the language for what is genuinely felt. And this can be very difficult work. So this is what we've got going on over the summer, really for the whole of July and until the 9th of August the 9th. So our culture, if you think about it, is far more comfortable with Mercury in its Gemini mode. I know I definitely am. It's quick, clever. Mind you saying that, I have Taurus, so I'm quite deliberated sometimes, but I've got another side where I just splurt it all out. But I've got Mercury in the sign of Taurus, so I can be plodding on what I'm going to say. And, sometimes, my words, I think with my Scorpio rising, they can bite a bit, but I've done enough introspection that I know when to hold and what to hold and what not to say as well, and what needs to be said. So Mercury in Gemini mode is quick, clever, surface level, and moving on. And in Cancer, it's something really different. It's asking that we stay with the feeling long enough to understand it before we try and speak it. So if if you can do that, try and stay with it long enough before you speak it. And then we communicate from a place of genuine emotional honesty rather than from how we think we should feel about something. With relationships, this retrograde may bring up conversations that have been avoided, things that one person has been feeling for a long time but has not yet known how to raise. So be aware of that. You may be approached where somebody needs to say something to you, or you may need to say something to others. I think it's going to be a mix, and particularly look at the aspects of that Mercury to your own chart and your own planets. Collectively, it's one thing. Individually, it's another. And this quality of this retrograde means that those conversations, when they do happen, they have the potential to be genuinely nourishing. And it's good if people, that we allow people to say what they need to say and listen, and then we do the same back. And if they come, that people give us that space as well. And if they come from real feeling rather than from a defended position, we all know the difference when we're defended. When somebody sort of tells us what they think we should do, sometimes we may have a defended position. And I heard something earlier where you can, if people are giving you advice that you don't particularly want, you can just say thank you. We don't have to go into a defended position. There can be many reasons why people should us, or why we do that to others. I personally have sort of grown into understanding that I'm not a shoulda to people. I might think it. I might think, oh, they should do this or they should do that. But I don't need to voice that. We're not in control of other people's lives, and we don't need to be. Yeah. So Mercury in Cancer is at best, communicates with tenderness. That's what we're looking for, to be tender. It knows how to say a difficult thing in a way that the other person can actually receive it because it's speaking from care rather than from the need to be right. So it's not about being right, it's about solving something. And for those of us or people that do, work in any field where emotional communication matters, which I do, and I'm sure others do that are listening to this, therapy, counseling, caregiving, teaching, any creative work that draws on personal experience, this retrograde is a period of unusual depth and potential richness. It can be very rich and deep, and the material that surfaces will be real. So if you embark on some writing or art at this time, it could be really going to levels that you've not experienced before. So the challenge is to simply trust the process enough to let the things come in. And the wider retrograde season, so let's see here, that's the 25th of July. I just want to see, because we have got, before I go on, I've got a little bit more that I'm going to say, but I want to say that we do have on the, you can see that Chiron's moved into Taurus at this point. So this is July the 25th. So we're going to go back by days because I think that's the 19th of June that Chiron is shifting into the sign of. Yep, there you go. So there's Chiron on the 19th of June. And if we go an hour ahead, because that's 4 a.m. in the morning. 1, 2, 3. There you go. Chiron into, it's literally around midnight in the UK that's going on the 19th of June, around that time. So that's worth clocking as well. So the wider retrograde season, it's worth placing, Mercury retrograde in Cancer with the larger context of what is happening this summer, because it does not stand on it just alone. Neptune stations retrograde on the 7th of July at 4 degrees. So you can see that's June 2026. And if I go days ahead to the 7th of June, we're checking out Neptune here. If you're looking at the chart, you might just be listening. The 7th of July, sorry. There you go. That's the 7th of July. Neptune will go retrograde at 4 degrees of Aries, and that's while Mercury is still retrograde. And then Saturn will station on July the 26th. So I'm going to go to July the 26th. I'm moving the chart. So that's July the 26th, and we have a station of Saturn. It's going to be really exciting for all of us with all these retrogrades. Inner work. So it will be 14 degrees of Aries. That's 3 days after Mercury stations direct. You can see you can see here that it's in direct motion on the 26th of July. And Pluto has been retrograde since earlier this year. By the time we reach late July, we're in a significant inward turn, with all of these multiple planets asking for review, reconsideration, and deeper processing of what has been lived through. And Mercury retrograde in Cancer is the opening of the season. It sets the tone inward, emotional, memory rich, and it's concerned with the private, foundational, rather than what is public and forward moving. So the summer of 2026 is not a season of aggressive outward expansion. It's a season for feeling into what's true. And I think a lot of us need to do that at this time, because we've been sort of on a hamster wheel, trying to figure out what we should all be doing, where we're going, how are we going to, achieve certain things. And particularly when we had the Neptune Saturn Neptune conjunction, our dreams, the whole shift into Aries from Pisces, a bit of like energy came up there that was a bit different for all of us. So it's allowing the tidal flow of Cancer, to let it do what water does, find its level. We're finding our level. That's what we're doing. We're finding where we're at, and fill the available space and reveal, it's about patient movement, and the shape of the ground beneath, defines where the water, how it's held as well, and where it sort of, where it settles to. So what we can do with this retrograde, it's straightforward in principle, but not in practice. It's slow down the communication that feels urgent and the message you feel compelled to send from a place of emotional flooding. So, where you might want to send a text message or tell somebody the way it is. It's like taking in the, don't get, that's getting triggered, the emotional flooding. It's trigger. We're triggered, we say something. It's like just taking it a bit easy, take a deep breath and step back. So, because the message that we're sending is like it's waiting, and let it feel settled and let it take shape and then speak. And we can use this period to have conversations that have been waiting. So if you've been waiting to have a conversation, sometimes it can be really scary, to have conversations about feelings. If you think about it, I think this is very true for all of us. So, the confrontational ones, the honest one, it's about honest ones. It's about honest conversations. It's not confronting. It's the ones where we actually felt, we're feeling and we need to say what we're feeling. And it's emotional honesty and it's intimacy. And this is really possible with this going on. So, look after the home, pay attention, the space you're living in. Are the arrangements of your domestic life, are they genuinely reflecting who you are and what you need? Because many of us, we work, we pay our way, pay our bills, pay the mortgage, pay the rent, and we're not in a position of feeling genuinely, our place doesn't genuinely reflect who we are. And the fourth house territory as well is moving through, and it's asking, about this home. It's not just a building, like our body isn't just a body, is it? So it's a felt sense of being in the body or in the home with the right people, in the right relationships of our own roots and foundations. And if we pay attention to what's coming up from memory, because past memories can surface during this time, that's important. And, it's not surfacing to trap you in it. They're not resurfacing to trap you, because sometimes we can go back to old memories and they can bring up feelings and then we think that we haven't moved ahead, but this is not the case. Sometimes we're revisiting something that becomes clarity to us, and it's something to tell us about the present, because sometimes we can be on this role of doing the same thing, and it's not really what we want. We very much don't really think about the way we live our lives as human beings. We sort of get stuck into the rut of just doing, the same thing the same way every day. And then we just, time passes, we get older. So Mercury in Cancer is, trusting the emotional intelligence of memory. Memory has an emotional intelligence about it. And this is why a lot of people who've been through trauma, like complex PTSD trauma and stuff, it takes them a long time from a dissociated place, particularly with childhood trauma, for these memories to surface and come up. And it can happen a lot for people in dream time or in a felt experience in the body. And then it's the conversation between the body and the mind, to figure out what's going on, or in a dream where you have a dream that, can change the course of our lives. Dreams in our sleep time, because we will wake up with a whole new perspective on something that we didn't think about, but it came to us in our sleep. If you've ever experienced that, you can let me know in the video below. So it's asking us to trust. And then when it stations on June the 30th, let's see here, June the 30th, that station, the exact station day, the sky on that day will tell us what's going on, so we can look at that as well. And also the concentration of the fifth harmonic aspects, which I'm still learning about. They're called quintiles and biquintiles, which are not aspects that you see often discussed. So that's something I'm working on learning. But they're degrees that become very creative, and they're quite beautiful, but they carry a very specific meaning. So a quintile, as an example, is a 72-degree aspect, and that belongs to the harmonic family associated with creative intelligence and with the capacity to perceive patterns that others miss, with a quality of mind that synthesizes and finds original connections where the major aspects, you know, the conjunction, square, trine, and opposition speak to fundamental dynamics of integration, tension, flow, and confrontation. The quintile, when it's in our charts, speaks to creative genius in the classical sense, inspired insight as well. And with Mercury station, this is where the mind turning inward should be saturated with fifth harmonic aspects, and it's not incidental. So this retrograde is not simply about reviewing old communications or revisiting domestic arrangements, though it is certainly about those things. It's about a deeper truth and turning to a creative and perceptual mind that becomes visible when Mercury stops moving forward and begins to look at what has been passed over. So also the moon, is going to be quintile Uranus of 8 minutes of the orb. So the moon at that time, although I'm not sure, that's the 30th of June. So let me bring that up again. So I've got a lot to learn in astrology, as we all do. We keep learning, but some of these aspects are just beautiful to understand. So the moon is, let's check that I've got this right. The moon is 19 degrees up here on the 30th of June. And I think that's 100 and almost, no, that's not quite right. So I'm not going to go there. But that Uranus is a flash of insight that arrives through feeling rather than through thought. And we've also got the North Node. I'm going to go to the North Node square Uranus, which we've been experiencing at this time. If I go back to today, I'm jumping around here, but this is the 14th here. And we've got the North Node squares Uranus, and this is almost exact because it has been this week, the last few days. And this is also, this aspect has been going on since the full moon in Sagittarius. It was exact on the 12th of June, and it's still present with us and still tied to Mercury station on the 30th. So it's still continuing this square the nodes here. The South Node. We're following the path to the North Node, which is in Pisces. It's about trust. And this cycle, the Uranus in Gemini, is generating something very exciting. The nodal axis is also quintile. Again, I'll tell you more about that, not now, but Mars at 28 minutes separating. So this is quintile to Mars as well. Have I got this? Okay. Getting lost with my notes here. So Lilith also appears prominently in this station as well. And she was encountered with the Sagittarius full moon. I do like Lilith very much. And then Chiron is also involved. It's quintile to Mercury, and Chiron in Taurus, the wound of worth and the body. So we can see, I've got it at 29 degrees there. I'll go ahead by a couple of days. There you go, back in Taurus. But it will retrograde back into the sign of Aries briefly as well later this year, and then it will go direct in, it'll head back to Taurus for the coming years ahead. And if we remember that, Chiron in Taurus is to do with the body and the voice and our worth, and creative contact with Mercury at that moment it stations is an aspect of 1 degree or less, of the wounded healer. And the planet of communication on the day the planet turns inward is quite interesting. It's really significant. And the healing that Chiron in Taurus is working with as well, the wound of felt worthlessness, where we feel that. Isn't it incredible that we feel this sense of worthlessness as human beings when we think just how incredible and amazing we are? That so many people suffer with that, like it's a global phenomena. It's something that we suffer from, and words and what was said and how it was said, and our feeling hurt. The human condition is very tricky, but the more we understand ourselves, I do believe the easier it gets. We can be kinder to ourselves. So it's, what wants to be spoken during this retrograde has its roots in that wound as well. And we've all been wounded at varying different degrees and levels, which is immeasurable because each of us takes, we could have the same wound, exact same situation, and we would all take in the how we feel that into our being differently for all of us. So this is not just about the individual, this is about the collective as well. And I hope that's been useful to you. I'll come back with more. And I know I've not gone into the Gemini new moon that much today, but I think that we can find plenty of videos on YouTube for that. So hope you enjoyed that. And if you know where this is happening in your chart, then maybe you'd like to let me know. For me, it's going to be happening in my 8th house. There you go. Catch you later.